This Plenary, Seattle Laboratory of Arts, Culture, and Equitable Development. And a lot of that came out of a conversation that we were lucky enough to have with our colleague Hung Vu, who's at Boeing here in Seattle. Is Hung with us this morning? I know she was here yesterday. But we were sort of talking about being in Seattle and wanting to have our conversations informed by the place we were. And she talked about some of the issues that were most present in the conversations here in Seattle, and she began talking about things like housing development, like involuntary displacement, like the history of the waves of immigration that have shaped Seattle, like issues of the environment, like issues of equity, like issues of culture. And she sort of doodled out on a cocktail napkin or something what a sort of dream team of people who could actually have this conversation would look like, and we got them. So there are 4 people who are sort of coming up here, and no pressure, but are going to totally wow us, inspire us, and sort of, just set off a whole new series of conversations. So I'm going to introduce each of them briefly because I just had 1 or 2 things I wanted to say, and then I'll invite you guys up to sort of come here. So the folks that you're about to hear from, the first is Doris Koo, who's here in Seattle now doing extraordinary work, had formerly worked at Enterprise, had worked at the Seattle Housing Authority, and is a leader that I've sort of known and respected for the work she did with affordable housing in New York City's Chinatown and on the Lower East Side. So I'm thrilled to actually have gotten a chance to meet you, Doris, and sort of get to hear from you because I've just respected your work for so long. The second person is Vivian Phillips, who is chair of the Seattle Arts Commission and one of the co-founders of the historic Central Area Arts and Culture District. And she gets to, by dint of being chair of the commission, work as part of and in concert with one of the most extraordinary local arts agencies in the country. And her colleague, Randy Engstrom, is here, who leads that office. And I just want to give a big shout out to the work that Seattle's been doing on that, because I think Vivian would agree that it's absolutely wonderful. Michael Seiwerath is the Director of Community Programs and External Relations for Capitol Hill Housing. And the project that ArtPlace was able to partner with them on is 12th Avenue Arts, which kind of perfectly embodies a lot of what we're about, right? This is a development that provides 88 homes for people who are earning around 60% of area median income. It has 2 theaters. It has office space for Capitol Hill Housing. It has community meeting space. It has street-level retail. And it has 40 parking spots for the Seattle Police Department as part of a complex arrangement that got that project to actually happen. So that notion of sort of theater and police officers and affordable housing and restaurants coming together is just really exciting to me. And then the conversation will be chaired by the, I think the Seattle paper called him lanky and energetic when he arrived in Seattle, which I quite like, but by Robert Feldstein, who's the director of the Office of Policy and Innovation for the City of Seattle Mayor's Office. And he's someone else whose work I've been following since he was running a community court in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and has worked in sort of criminal justice and policy issues in New York City government and now here in Seattle. So I was joking before, but I really am deeply excited by the conversation we're about to hear and how we're going to sort of be rooted in Seattle. And yet I think all of these issues will be deeply resonant for the work that we're all doing and the conversations we're all having. So with that, if you guys have taken your last bites, please help me feel welcome our next panel, Robert, Michael, Vivian, and Doris.
I am very excited to be here. The energy, I've come to a lot of morning plenaries. There's something going on here. I don't know what happened last night, but there's clear excitement and energy. It's a good group. We do have quite a lineup here, and I think we're gonna, Elizabeth Alexander's tough competition, but we're gonna give it our best. So I'm just gonna give a little review about grounding us in the city and what's going on here in Seattle. Some of this you knew, some of this you may know, some is new. Each will give a little bit, 2 minutes about how they come to this, and then we'll hope to get an ongoing discussion, then rope you in as we move along. So, welcome to Seattle. This is a city that right now, in a sort of classic structure, can be told as a tale of 2 cities. We've got, if you counted them, 62 cranes in the sky, which is more than any other city in America. New York City is 13 times as big, but we have 3 times as many cranes as New York City right now. We have more building permits per capita than anywhere else in the US. We have the highest density of millionaires under 30 in the country. We're also a leader in social policy issues. You know, we're only the 18th biggest city in the country, but I think we sort of punch above our weight, making national news with leading the way on $15 minimum wage, or mandatory composting, or defiance of the new federal administration's anti-immigration bias. Been leaders historically on social issues, marriage equality, marijuana legalization, clear focus on equity. The mayor has invested in new initiatives strictly focused on equity and the environment, really bringing environmental justice lens to what we do, equitable development, we've partnered with people here and others, and trying to bring that focus to everything. On top of that, we're rated as one of the better art and culture cities in places like Forbes and Condé Nast, so come and enjoy it. But it is not just this utopia. This information-driven economy has some consequences. We have a homeless rate that's climbing at double-digit percentages every year. We have a city that may be solving poverty by chasing it out. As the county and the state and the country become more diverse, Seattle is becoming more white. So how do we reconcile this growth, this prosperity, this possibility, and these challenges? What's the role of art? What's the role of community-based, community engagement to preserve culture in these challenging times? That's what questions I want to get at. I'm still trying to find answers. I think we've done some great, exciting things, and we'll get to, but I think there's more to learn. So that's what I'm hoping to discuss. Doris, you want to talk a little bit about how you came here?
Good morning. How many of you live in Seattle? Okay. New York City? Chicago? Okay, those are the 3 places that I've lived in. Roughly, 6, 7 years in New York City, 15, and I've been in Seattle for 25. Started as a community organizer in New York City's Chinatown, and have always appreciated the nexus between community empowerment and the preservation and enhancement of arts and culture. Culture, to me, is more than, art and expressions of who you are. It is part of the sense of self of a person, defining where you came from, what your values are, and where you're heading. I am now working on the Yesler Community Collaborative, which was formed 3 years ago in response to a major community transformation effort at Yesler Terrace. For those of you who are not from Seattle, Yesler Terrace is the blue shaded community that's right by the freeway, close to the International District, represented by the bright orange, Little Saigon, which is the sort of yellowish, the central area in purple, and then the light green, Capitol Hill and First Hill. These are communities that are considered close to the downtown core, and historically have found themselves put in technically unfavorable residential communities that are close to downtown hotels, railroad stations. Those of you who are familiar with Chinatowns, we're always next to the Union Station or the Amtrak station, wherever you find yourself in, from DC to LA. And that's because immigrants had to find a way to come and work, and many of my ancestors actually came to build the railroads. But as downtown rises in the horizon, and you see the skyline and development of the brand new South Lake Union in Seattle, which is the tech hub right now of Amazon, Google, biotech research, development pressures have steadily come south of downtown, impacting on the communities that have been there for over a century. Anchored in the middle of this picture, Yesler Terrace has been around for 75 years. The nation's first racially integrated public housing project. It itself came about through technically what is called slum clearance, replacing Japantown with 600 units of public housing. And for 75 years, Yesler Terrace has produced some of the best and the most well-known leaders we've known. Former Governor Gary Locke, who went on to become the Commerce Secretary and the US Ambassador to China. And around Yesler Terrace grew neighborhoods that shared humble beginnings and roots. Chinatown, International District, Little Saigon, the Central District, and Capitol Hill, where a fabric that kind of run together had been the cultural integrity and cohesion of those communities, existing and developing resilience because of external redlining discrimination practices, but found a way to use the cultural tenacity, heritage, and history to boost themselves as communities and became designated places where people can find a sense of belonging. And as Yesler Terrace is being redeveloped now through a federal choice neighborhood grant to remake the entire 28 acres from 500 units of public housing to 5,000 units. 5,000 units of mixed income housing with full one-for-one replacement of public housing, increase of another 1,000 affordable housing units, but 4,000 units of market rate housing. 1 million square foot of commercial space, 4.5 acres of park, trails, and public space. It's a remaking that embraces today's values of equitable development, respect for the environment, walkability, and art. Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about the impact Yesler Terrace will have on its surrounding neighbors. But first, I'd like to show you a couple of slides on the arts theme at Yesler Terrace. Walkability, nature, connectivity, street loops, celebrating its proximity to the densest downtown neighborhood with lots of open space and wonderful view. Next slide, please. And one of the key features at Yesler Terrace is the building of what is called a 10th Avenue hill climb that broke down the walls surrounding Yesler Terrace from the other neighborhoods, allowing communities to walk to Little Saigon International District and come into Yesler Terrace to visit it as a brand new community. There's a lot to be learned about the principles guiding this, and I invite you to go to the Seattle Housing Authority website to look at Yesler Terrace and where it is now. 5 years in the making, we're feeling the joy and the celebration of Yesler, but increasingly with the booms and the cranes that Robert talked about, also feeling displacement pressure. And what you're going to hear from Vivian and Michael are ways communities organize themselves, whether it's through arts and culture, whether it's through affordable housing, environmental stewardship, to figure out a way to ward off or to enhance and present a different narrative to the physical, economic, and cultural displacement pressures that we're sensing. I'm going to stop here and let Vivian introduce what she's doing in the African American community.
Super, thank you. Well, welcome to Seattle in February. I am a native of Seattle. I know, I have cousins and spent a lot of time on the East Coast, and they were like, there are black people in Seattle? I still get that question. And you'll see why in a moment. But when I look around the room, and I said this to Randy yesterday, I was like, wow, I know that this is not a Seattle-based convening because the diversity of the room just trumps everything that we could possibly do in this way. But I'm really happy to be here. I had no idea that Hung Vu was the originator of doodling what this plenary would look like, but I thought, hey, here's a doodle biz recognition of the work that we're doing in the Central Area. I am co-founder of the Central Area Arts and Cultural District, and I live in that purple area that was on the map that Doris showed. My family is originally from the South. They are a story of the Great Migration from the South to the North. My father was a Pullman porter, and he got here by train, and that's how my family got here. Oh God, I think it was like 65 years ago, followed by all of his sisters from Arkansas, and we all lived in the Central Area, which was the traditional and historic area for African Americans because it was redlined. That is the only place that we could reside in this city. So starting this project with establishing an arts and cultural district, the primary question that we asked was, what would it look like to create or to reimagine an African American history and aesthetic in the Central Area? Next slide. This is a significant image for me because it is a representation of people from our community being a part of the legislative process. So this is the signing of the legislation that established the Central Area Arts and Cultural District. Next. So this is what the city of Seattle looks like today. It's what it looked like when I was growing up here. The Central Area went from 70% African American in 1970 to we're probably at about 17% today. For me, I'm starting to recognize the trauma of living in an environment that was traditionally an environment that was very, very familiar to me. Very familiar to my family. I had a conversation with my oldest child who lives in Fife, which is just on the edge of Tacoma, south of Seattle. That's where he can afford to live. And so we talked about the possibility of him being able to move back to the city of Seattle. When I told him about this program that I just heard about through the Urban League in conjunction with Vulcan, who's developing a prime piece of real estate at the corner of 23rd and Jackson, and I said, hey, look, if you get through this, you can get on the list. And he was like, oh my God, do you think I can move back to Seattle and my son could go to the same high school I went to? That's a traumatic recognition when you have essentially lost the familiarity of everything that developed you over time. So what we're trying to do with the Arts and Cultural District is not only preserve our history and our legacy as African Americans in this city, but to create an environment that is representative of that as well, and to also set a foundation for future development and recognition. We don't want to create, kind of this narrative around what used to be. Yes, we know it used to be, but what is it today and what can it be tomorrow? The difference between the Central Area, and I say this all the time, the Central Area Arts and Cultural District and the first Arts and Cultural District, which Michael will talk about, I'm sure, at Capitol Hill, is that Capitol Hill was really focused on trying to secure place for artists. People were being priced out of the market. We were losing artists out of that core area of the city. And what's happening in the Central Area is a potential erasure of African Americans' existence in a place that we could only live until 1968 when the housing covenants were lifted. So, final slide for me is, next slide, is the areas of focus for our arts and cultural district. Again, create and sustain our environment, preserving the Black and African American legacy in the Central Area, sustaining and strengthening physical place. I grew up in an environment in the Central Area that was all about single family homes. They were all sizes, and we know that when people migrated from the south to the north, one family would be the renter of a house, and then 10 more families would move, and that would be the place that they landed. And so many single-family homes in the central area have now been replaced by what I call ugly boxes. And, oh God, they're so ugly. And again, it can be very, very traumatic to walk through a neighborhood that only has multiple family dwellings that have, in my view, uninspired architecture. I don't know where all the interesting architects, I think they all left Seattle because we were left with these dwellings that just don't inspire. And to just see what we can do around re-engagement of African Americans who live in the county more than they live in the city, and how can we draw them back into the city to a place that's familiar, and what can we do to create an economic environment, i.e. Black-owned businesses that used to be very plentiful in the central area, as well as arts and cultural opportunities. So that's the work that I've been engaged with. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Yeah. Heck yeah. I'm Michael Seiwerath. I came to this work two ways. I'm a fourth-generation resident of the Puget Sound region, which Seattle's a part of. And I ran a small to the mid-size film arts organization in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, which is kind of just a mile north of kind of Yesler Terrace, and then the central area kind of abuts the central area. And know firsthand the challenges of running an organization like that. I think secondly, and most importantly, when I was in 8th grade, I was a little over 6 feet tall, and I tried out for the basketball team and rode the bench the whole season. So to be called the dream team is something I've been waiting for my entire life, so I'll take that. I work at Capitol Hill Housing, so for 40 years we've been building vibrant and engaged communities in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. We're the Community Development Corporation, so deep community work, partnerships, a lot of community outreach, working with the Chamber of Commerce, the Community Council, small neighborhood groups. Culture is in our founding charter from 1976. And then we do affordable apartments. We're in 10 neighborhoods across the city and have roughly 1,400 apartments open or coming online soon. Jamie set up the 12th Avenue Arts site, which is the slide you see here. The 12th Avenue Arts building was a culmination of about 14 years of basically banging on the door of City Hall and saying, let us redevelop a surface parking lot where the Seattle Police Department parked their cars behind a barbed wire fence in the middle of a transit-rich neighborhood. It was kind of a crazy location for such a low-density use. It's 100 feet from the police station, so they very much need parking there, working 24/7, and worked through a couple mayors and a vision everybody liked but no one would say yes to. And then we really galvanized the community around it when we brought in arts as a component. Went back to City Hall and said, our community's losing arts and culture. Seattle's becoming a more desirable place to live after 100 years of more rapid growth in the suburbs. Seattle's now growing faster than the suburbs. People want to live in the city again, and we're in danger of losing what we have. Particularly the fringe theaters. So the slide you see is a 6-story building where the arts piece is only about 10% of the footprint, maybe not even that. But we put an 8-foot tall orange sign on the outside that said 12th Avenue Arts and really got the community behind this vision of preserving it. So underground police parking, condo owned by the city, 4 floors of affordable apartments that are dramatically below the market rate buildings around the corner. It's become a community hub for nonprofit offices. We have space there. The 2 theaters, black box theaters, 150 and 80-seat theaters, are run by a consortium of 3 really small fringe theater companies that have kind of 0 to 1 paid staff. So doing very good, high-quality artistic work on a shoestring, and now they have the professional space that they deserve as artists in our community. The theaters are booked, fully booked for about the next 18 months. I mean, the demand has been huge and really embraced by the community. So this site opened a couple years ago, and now we're continuing to pivot onto other challenges. Next slide, please. As I said, Seattle's become a really desirable place. Here's 2 wheat-pasted pieces of art on signal boxes, 50 feet from our office. The one on the left, I think, really captures some of the tension around the influx of weekend nightlife revelers in a community that's been the center for the LGBT community for years and a center for the cutting-edge arts. And now we're seeing bachelorette parties in gay bars on Saturday nights. And the pushback to that. And it's a city that I think and a neighborhood, I welcome everybody, and I welcome more people, and I think it's right where we should be making more density and more space is in neighborhoods like Seattle. But how do we retain that piece of the fabric? And there's sometimes this dichotomy, be it false or real, about the other and the tech bro that is moving into our city. I think a lot of that is around tension around affordability and being pushed out of your own neighborhood. So very real pressures around economic displacement, physical displacement, and cultural displacement in one neighborhood that's been a center for the cutting edge arts. So a couple years ago, working with the city, we started the Capitol Hill Arts District, which at first markets the amazing constellation of small arts groups we have to make sure people know, come here on a Saturday night. You can see dance, theater, film, you name it, after you get out of your Uber or your light rail or your bicycle. These wealth of opportunities exist alongside really good restaurants and a ton of bars and new apartments. But really now trying to push for more real incentives to keep these groups here. Most of them rent, a lot of them are in old warehouses, and their stability at best is as strong as the length of their lease, which is no place to continue to exist as a performing arts organization in a city like Seattle. So very real challenges, but the Arts District and working with these other neighborhoods around equity, culture, and sustainability more and more is where we're going.
So, title of this is A Lab of Arts, Culture, Equitable Development. Let's talk a little bit about some of the experiments. We're a city, we're trying to push ideas. What are 1 or 2 things that we think are working? I'm going to ask what's not as well, but what are 1 or 2 things? What's one thing you're excited about? One thing that you say, we did this and this is what we're seeing?
As you heard, there's so much similarity and opportunities and challenges faced by all of our communities. The one thing that I'm most excited about was under the short life of the Yesler Community Collaborative, we actually serve as a backbone organization to bring together community leaders like Capitol Hill Housing, like the Central Area Collaborative, and many of the groups that Vivian's working with, working in the International District, Chinatown, and Lower Saigon, and Yesler Terrace, and unified our common vision into one vision of what the city should be like, recognizing the asset of culture and art and history and people in the community as it grows into the next century. The commonality in the voice had already made impact in our collective advocacy to City Council, and in an hour I'll be testifying before City Council yet again in terms of the city's proposed inclusionary zoning ordinance called Mandatory Housing Affordability Ordinance that need to set aside the highest on-site affordability percentages in our group of neighborhoods. And the mayor's office has embraced that concept, and we are now going through supporting legislation in each individual neighborhoods to build our density with equity and to preserve the culture. So it's very exciting.
It is.
How many cranes did you say are up in Seattle?
62.
62 cranes.
Last time I counted. But
62 cranes. So what excites me most about looking out at all the cranes is that represents money. That means that this city has so much resource available that we can somehow come together and really start to take advantage of the available resources. It excites me that the city of Seattle has put aside resources and dedicated resources to really focus on equity. Those things really excite me because there's a lot of opportunity there. And I'll talk about the challenges of it later.
I'm sure you will.
I think, it's working. We're in a city where most neighborhoods get the value of arts and culture. You don't have to show up and kind of pull out the slide deck about economic impact and jobs creation. So that's a good starting point. I think every neighborhood plan in the city of Seattle calls out arts and culture as one of its goals. So we're there. That's a good starting point. The challenges, I think, are the resources and the incentives from the city are not nearly enough. The costs are so high to do a lot of this work. And we're really pushing for more incentives for particularly arts and culture preservation. And I think people absolutely don't understand the urgency. They don't understand that these groups, particularly presenting arts groups that are in a warehouse and have 3 years on their lease, they can't move to the next block. They may cease to exist if they can't control their home. So the challenges are very real on that front, and we need to move much more quickly than we're moving.
Well, you're leading into the next question. So what's the next step for the city or private philanthropy or community? What are the next steps if we're going to take this challenge head on? What do we need to be doing?
We talked about this before too, and I think one of the biggest challenges in my community has to do with a couple of things. One is historic distrust of public policy and the negative impacts that have come with what appears to be goodwill. And what that has served to do is to fracture the community to some extent. So we've had to work a lot together through this kind of element of, well, is the city sanctioning you over sanctioning us, over sanctioning them? And really being in a position where we can start to look at resources to build an infrastructure that supports collective work.
Yeah.
To me, Robert, one of the biggest challenge is land. Community is about sense of place. City is about conglomeration of communities. So when there's no ownership of land in any particular community, whether it's in the artist community, the Black community, the Asian community, you will involuntarily be displaced sooner or later if there's no concerted effort to regain your foothold. So building partnerships is key, but we are beginning to look at policy implications to call for putting city-owned properties and publicly owned properties in play to boost communities and to create whatever left of possibilities for affordable housing, mixed use, artist space, and affordable retail. Right. That is a deep challenge because, where we see a streetcar maintenance yard in the International District, the Department of Transportation sees a streetcar maintenance yard in the International District. Right. So how do you get into the fight without taking 10 years in Capitol Hill to convince the police station, you can park your cars here still, but give us your service parking lot. Yeah. It took 10 years, and we don't have 10 years to lose.
I think the other thing, when we talk about arts and culture, in my culture, art is a part of our culture. I mean, so in many African communities, around the diaspora, there's not a word for art because it's a part of your life. I don't want to say that it happens naturally because I don't want to throw that out there and be stereotypical. Because I'm not going to do a dance and I don't know all the songs. But you know what I'm saying? I just don't want to make it seem like I'm being stereotypical. But when you start to talk about sustaining art and culture, the thing that people go back to is, well, how do I develop wealth? Right. I mean, that's a big issue. and we know that home ownership and property ownership is like the way to begin to establish wealth and have it be something that is generational, right? So the median home cost in Seattle is $772,000.
Oh, yeah, 20% increase in a year.
Who can afford that? I mean, we're fortunate that we got in the market. I moved back into the central area at just the right moment, because 5 minutes later I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And this is a community that I grew up in, that I had to drive through and look at and go, I don't know if I can live there, which is happening generationally now. So I think that is urgent as well. In what ways are we able to not just create affordable rent, but how can we create affordable home ownership opportunities? And then what are the programs that we can develop that allows us, which is something that Capitol Hill Housing is doing, allows us to come together as a community to work on a development together and then turn it over in some way to community ownership.
So I want to follow up on this, which is not, I actually want to connect these two conversations, which is not just home ownership, but also ownership by cultural institutions who are, on a 3-year lease, and talk about the real challenge we've run into, and I've worked on issues with each of you on this, where you have local community groups who want a stake, want home ownership or ownership of property, some government parcel or private sector that's selling an important corner that people want to be part of. And yet the facts of the matter is that our current structure, for whatever institutional reason, those groups aren't seen as having the capacity, the financing, the bona fides to develop it. And so just to say, well, we want it isn't good enough. But there's other groups that have capacity, have strength, that could do it, but aren't the locally community-driven groups. What are the creative marriages, partnerships that you can blend some of that local, on-the-ground cultural knowledge with those who have the sort of technical, on paper, check the boxes so they can do it, so that it's not just, on paper, like, yes, you're the shiny face and they're the people getting the money. What are the real ways to make that work? What are the challenges of making that work?
Replicate Doris Koo. Replicate Doris Koo, or a Doris Koo, right? And have that capacity placed in communities, because this is really an amazing resource for people who want to build that kind of partnership. And we just don't have that flowing throughout our neighborhood.
But what are, so Doris, yes, but what are the logistics of it? What are the things people have to work out together? Michael, you worked on Liberty Bank housing.
We're doing a whole forum on this in 9 days called Own It. And so if you're in Seattle, come to it. It's next Thursday. If you're not, it'll be streaming online. But it's really looking at creative models, because not everybody can buy a $750,000 house, right? So it's this total winner-loser dynamic that we have to get beyond. So we have to think about different ownership models. So there's some really good examples happening in the Northwest right now. And we just have to get out of this mindset of you either own a single-family home or you're screwed, right? And you're a renter. So there's an arts ownership model in South Seattle. Equinox Studios is forming B Corps, and then all the artists in there that have artist studios actually have equity stakes just by paying their $200 a month rent for their studio. And then if they ever leave, they can cash out their ownership. There's the Community Investment Trust model out of Mercy in Portland, where they're crowdsourcing hyper-local ownership of a strip mall full of local businesses, and you have to live within 3 proximate zip codes. So there's ways and that's $10 a month. If you can spend $10 a month, you can be part owner of that commercial part of your neighborhood. We need more community land trusts where you have permanent affordability. Seattle's not, maybe the rents are going to do this or ownership is going to do this, then they'll probably go back up again. So how do you make sure 30 years from now, or even 3 years from now, we don't live on a street where it's only millionaires? I don't want to live on that street. So we need a multitude of tools like that. And I think I'm going to say something kind of controversial. I think we actually need more condominiums because we don't have many in Seattle. And again, not everybody can afford $750K for a house. So condominiums really boring old condominiums can provide ownership for a lower price point.
Robert, I think it's more important now than ever before to look for partners to build partnerships. Where you have a solid, trusting set of partners, you make headway. You know, in the Central District, we have dynamic young leaders aspiring to define and take back the Central District as Africa Town. Aspirational, visionary, many of them sort of high-tech. I never understood what hack the CD means. But they hacked the CD, the Central District.
Every year.
But anyway, for them to then pair up with Capitol Hill Housing, which is an unlikely team from the Black community reaching out or extending an invitation for someone who's established but more white in Capitol Hill Housing to come together and lend the expertise is the way to go in the future. Africa Town does not have 40 years to build up its development expertise like Capitol Hill Housing does. So you almost have to translate your visions into a collective action plan and forge the trust and build a partnership, and through working together, deepen your partnership. Yep. Another example is the Southeast Opportunity Center in Rainier Valley, where Homesite, which is a locally based home ownership, affordable home ownership organization, is galvanizing community organizations from the Eritreans to the Somali organizations, and helping forge together a multicultural, multi-ethnic kind of vision, and then put forth a proposal to the city to get funding to make it happen. So we call these communities of opportunities, and partnerships and collaborations are key behind it.
Right. Two things I want to highlight in that. One, in the multicultural, in the Southeast Economic Opportunity Center, it took a lot of disparate ideas, disparate communities who could have had competing asks of the city, which would have made it either paralyze the city or had to force the city into rewarding one, sanctioning the others, into, oh, here is a unified vision saying we want this in this community, and we've got all these groups who want it, which was a lot of work to go through the internal negotiation, but then present to the cities something unassailable, unarguable. Admittedly, we can't put all the money in. I'm just going to tell you again right now. But we're working with partners to do that.
What?
I know. But you know, to get that unified vision creates a path that wouldn't have been there if it had been lots of groups stumbling with parts of ideas and one rendering they got someone to do and someone else with a one concept paper. Instead, there's a unified pack, which makes it easier. I want to jump back a little bit to the Liberty Bank housing, which is I don't know if you could talk a little bit about, because it's the ownership options at the end. I mean, there's a number of pieces that I just think are an interesting model to unpack for a moment.
Sure. So it's the Liberty Bank building's the site of the first multiracial or African-American owned bank west of the Mississippi that had a long, proud history in our city. Closed a couple decades ago. And we acquired the land now 3-4 years ago in really the center of the Central District, which Vivian's been talking about. We're, for Seattle, a relatively high-capacity affordable housing developer. So we have the land, we're putting together the city funding, the state funding, and a tool called low-income housing tax credits. So we'll break ground on it next month, and then we will own it for 15 years because that's the tax credit compliance period, which is a boring way of saying that in some ways, we almost have to own it. And then after that, there's a first right of refusal or purchase to a community group like the Africa Town or Centerstone, so that ownership could transfer to a smaller, lower capacity neighborhood group who then has a 15-year ramp up to build the capacity towards ownership and know that this is coming. And this will be 115 units of apartments, so it'll be the biggest building we've ever done. So on one hand, great for us and our kind of portfolio and our mission, but it's a different model, and it took a lot of negotiations and conversations to get to a point where we agreed to this through a memorandum of understanding, which is all very transparent and posted on our website of the goals of it. So I think it's to that piece about marriage of different size organizations,
Right.
and maybe even kind of, I don't know if it's a non-traditional partnership because it's community-based organizations, but ones that are pretty focused on housing and some that aren't really focused on housing.
But getting into the game, wanted to get into the game, but didn't have the capacity. And affordable housing are very complicated financing stacks.
Yeah.
And you can help do that and then transfer. And they have a long-term goal, build towards that capacity. It's coming. It's a 15-year deadline, so it sets a path. I want to shift a little bit, which is that not every city has 62 cranes going on and has this wealth. And Seattle actually is a city founded by merchants and traders that goes through booms and busts, right? We're also famously the city that, the Klondike Gold Rush, and the city that had the billboard, last person leaving Seattle, please turn out the lights, because no one wanted to be here. So what is but arts has a place in both of those times, both in this right now preserving to make sure we're not a corporate soulless wasteland, but also as an economic driver in downtimes or across neighborhoods even now. What are some of the different, you guys have been in the game, done this for a while. Tell me about the differences either working as an economic driver or like fighting economic development.
Yeah.
Just because there's people in all sorts of cities all over the country.
Well, first of all, I think Seattle is a great place to create. I mean, because February lasts through June. So, so I think it really is a great place to create, and we've seen some art come out of Seattle that is internationally renowned. Specific to the African American community, in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, we had a really robust arts and cultural environment in the central area that was based in the African American aesthetic. We had two theater companies, one at 34th and Union, one at Langston Hughes, the Paul Robeson Theater Company, Black Arts West. You had all of these African drum ensembles. You had all these things happening. And then in 1969, Mayor Wes Ullman decided that he was going to push forward a project called the Thompson Expressway, which would essentially have cut a swath down the middle of the central area. And then there was the I-90 development. So people started leaving the center of the city. You ramp forward to the 80s and you see more of that reestablishment of that cultural aesthetic in the central area. But by that time, we've lost so much that it's really difficult to try to engage people at the level that they were once engaged. So I think we're going through that again now. It's 2017, and we're like, let's bring a lot of that back. What can we do to encourage what I always call repopulation, reignite an interest in central area arts and culture? But it has to be diverse, and that's why we're all kind of trying to work on making sure that it's palatable, it's interesting, and it's exciting for everyone. I personally believe that because an aesthetic is grounded in a particular culture does not exclude anybody else.
Yeah.
Not at all. So it's fine for us to be focused on the African American culture because it is a part of the American experience.
I want to open up, we have about a little less than 10 minutes. I want to see if anyone has questions in the audience. And there's 2 microphones, so if you raise your hand, I will send a mic to you. Right there in the front? Yes, we got a microphone coming to you.
Hi, good morning. Kalima Rose with PolicyLink. Vivian, I was wondering if you could talk about the role of the Arts Commission in any of this work, and if you have advice for the city of Oakland that is experiencing very similar dynamics, pushing out our cultural communities, and is looking to reestablish an Arts Commission.
So what I think is really interesting is that Michael was the chair of the Seattle Arts Commission right before I was the chair of the Seattle Arts Commission. And it kind of goes like that. One of the things that Michael really pushed forward was to establish a base of resources so that the Arts Commission could really focus on establishing its equity lens, right? So with Randy Engstrom's leadership, our commission has really put forward that everything we do, from advising on policy to actually distributing funds, will go through a filter of equity. And it's so well established now that we have secured additional, can I say? Yeah, about $1 million to actually implement our equity plan. And every single year when we go through our work plan process, equity is at the top of that list.
And arts, to structure, arts has dedicated revenue from tax on admissions, which means that, which will go cyclical, but it will have its own money that's not going to be cut, depending, which helps sort of being able to, in hard times, it's going to have its own pool.
And to Michael's credit, one of the other things that he was focused on was increasing the resources for the Office of Arts and Culture from 75% of the admissions tax to now 100%. So there's the will and there's also the way. So you can't just like have a heart for equity and equitable development and then not have the resources to actually make it work.
And that allows the office to engage in actual, helping with capital projects. New money means new tools to help actually sponsor and support. And with their focus of the commission and the department, Office of Arts and Culture, on equity, it really focuses that money on helping build, equitable art culture. Second question. Anyone else on this?
Just one final thing about that. One of the ways that we work with the mayor's office specifically is not just from a perspective of what can you do for us, but how can we be a real partner in advancing initiatives that are important to the administration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just second that arts has become a magnifier because instead of it just being something that could be as a drain to support arts, arts is like, how do we help advance equity in environment, equity in education? I mean, the work they're doing in education is profound and changing the city, and so they're really driving it in a number of other formats as well. Another question? Yes.
My name is Yvette Mangala. I'm here from Pittsburgh.
Oh, wait, here comes the mic.
Hi, my name is Yvette Mangalo. I'm here from Pittsburgh, and a question particularly for the two ladies. The central area seems really similar to the Hill District in Pittsburgh, and I'm just wondering, working there for the last 10 years, like how do you move from that, like what can be and what is now from what used to be and putting that back, and the people that are just consistently tied to that and just can't move past that.
Yeah. We actually have a lot of that, I think, in the group of individuals that have been working on the Arts and Cultural District. I mean, I'm one of those people, but I have to remind myself because I say it to other people, we can't just stay in the past. And I go, yeah, that's right, I can't. But I think you have to acknowledge it. It has to be acknowledged. We can't just act like certain things didn't happen or that there are certain changes aren't occurring. And so I think what we try to do is just really be honest about it and have that dialogue on a consistent basis. One of the things that I think has helped to move us forward is this relationship again with the city administrators, where we had two initiatives. One was the red, black, green crosswalk initiative. Mm-hmm. So there are about 11 crosswalks in the central area that are painted red, black, and green. And then we lost one of our jazz legends who was a Seattle resident, who was Ernestine Anderson. And being able to name a portion of a major arterial in the central area after this individual gave us both the past and the present power and capacity.
It's the same way. It's using your strength as an asset and using the cultural richness as sort of a platform for the future, and in small ways galvanize a starting point, because you can't reverse the decline or the displacement over a decade overnight, but you got to start somewhere. And I think there's a new generation of young leaders who are imaginative, dynamic, and resourceful in their creativity, and you really need to use the oral history part to link the past with the future, and then find a focal project to start, whether it's the Little Saigon Landmark Project as an aspiration, or Africa Town as another one. But bring the concept together and then start somewhere small and build from it.
with serious, I mean, we're replicating Doris Koo, serious capacity building. Okay, that's a great vision. What does it mean to put it on paper? What does it mean to have a proposal? All of those pieces. One more question. Right in the back, next to a microphone. Right next to you.
I actually have two questions. Sorry, I'm Lisa Adler from Horizon Theater Company in Atlanta. So the first question is, you're talking about the funding mechanism for the Seattle Arts Commission. I'm curious what that funding mechanism actually is. And the other question I have is, Seattle is a fairly developed arts community and have really come along in terms of your ability to engage the larger discussion of that. I'm curious how you got there. If anybody has a perspective of the steps, because many of us are much further along into making that happen, but are in the position where we're having leadership changes, and I'm curious how leadership plays into it and any kind of insight you can give into the development of the arts community and its acceptance by the political structure.
The broader arts community we're talking about?
I'm talking about arts in general,
Yeah.
and the fact that it is part of the discussion, and many cities were trying to become part of the discussion.
I bet we all have a
Yeah,
story to tell about
predates
that.
me. By the time I came in, I was impressed by it, so I don't know where that came from.
I think that Seattle has always had some interesting moneyed individuals. So I think we see a lot of our arts structures like Benaroya Hall, like McCall Hall, named for people who made major investments in particular arts endeavors. And I think that grew and spread. And it has flowed over into community, but we're also scrappy. We're really scrappy people. We may look all sophisticated and that kind of thing and speak well, but we are scrappy as hell. And we'll just make things happen.
Yeah.
And I think what Robert said earlier, sometimes you go to city government and it's undeniable. We are activist people. We do not take no for an answer. And we'll get to yes some kind of way.
I think that
We will get to yes some kind of way.
I think the scrappiness thing's true. I mean, we're a Center for Contemporary Dance, not because there was a white paper written and a top-down plan, but because a lot of broke 22-year-olds kept moving here, and we have a college that supports dance, and we have a couple organizations that celebrate weirdness and celebrate the intersection of different art forms. And I think we're also can be geographically isolated, so you can kind of do your own thing here. And I think some of the best work that's come out of this community is often the scrappy back alley stuff that then is doing work that no one else on the planet has seen before. And that's what I think we need to do a better job of lifting up.
It's this city's culture. I mean, this city was founded by entrepreneurs, Starbucks and Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon, but also all of this arts and culture come out of this place where people have been thrust here in the corner of the country and doing their own thing and going to make it happen one way or the other. I mean,
and we're a small community. I mean, you got to know people.
And treat them that you're going to see them again. Because,
exactly, and I think it's really a small enough community where the circle of friends is small, but it has, concentric circles around it as well. But yeah, I think we're just incredibly scrappy. One of the fun facts that I saw earlier is that, Seattle is one of the most literate cities in the country, and we have more library card holders in Seattle than in any other city. And we will go do our research.
Yes. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, this was great. Michael, Vivian, Doris.